Would you join your hearts in prayer with me? Come, Holy Spirit, rain down on us. May your light burst forth into this space right here, right now. Open us up, fill us with your holy wind. Help us to catch your Spirit moving through us, that as Paul said, we might be changed, though not in the fullness of the way Paul was imagining, but just a bit for today, the bit that you call us to. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Last Saturday, Emma Jean Watson, who was a member of this congregation, died, and her funeral was on Tuesday. For those of you who maybe weren't as familiar with Emma Jean, maybe you'll remember she was the smallish woman who would sit right about there, had brown hair, glasses, a walker, at least in the time that I knew her. She would wear the headset for the sound amplification here in the sanctuary, even after we got the sound system sorted out. She would listen intently. She played dominoes every Friday night with our no-name gamers. And she was here basically every Sunday that she could be, until some months ago she could no longer live on her own and had to move to a nursing home. She did not want to go. I don't know if any of you had ever had a conversation with Emma Jean. I'm sure many of you have or tried to. In my experience, she was not a woman of many words. Did anyone ever get her talking for like a long time about something? The dominoes people are shaking her head. Yes, Anne. I am curious what those subjects were. She did not speak at length most days to me. But as I was getting ready for her service this week and thinking about Emma Jean, I thought about her faithfulness and what I sometimes tell myself to in life about the value of showing up. How Emma Jean came to worship every Sunday, how she went to Domino's every Friday that she could, how she faithfully gave of what she had with joy to others around her. She was in the choir for a brief time, and in that time, she made it her personal mission to help our dear old Bill Handley, who's also not, he is still living, but not worshiping here with us. He lives in Lexington. She would help him with his robe when he would struggle with it. And some years ago, too, when Bill and Betty Swope were still living, she made it her personal mission to help them during fellowship time. I really liked that story and imagining the time when she was physically well enough to do that for others. Another story I heard from Tom Arney after the service, which I wish I had known beforehand because I thought it was so cute, was that she would often buy him those super hot pork rinds, and it would take him a while to get through those. And also, she one time bought him a bib because he often would spill stuff on himself at the domino group. Sorry, Tom, if you didn't want me sharing that story. I thought it was both a cute sign of caring and noticing, and of course, also a little bit cheeky, right? A little bit humorous. When I thought about Emma Jean, I thought about a saint, Saint Therese of Lisieux, who did not live a long life, did not live a public life. She was a French Carmelite nun who lived most of her life cloistered away in the convent, but she wrote extensively about God's love. She became known for what people call the little way of Jesus. Richard Rohr writes about her that she lived in a time in the 19th century Catholic Church where the predominant belief, and maybe it is even today for us, of an angry, punitive God and the goal of Christian life being perfectionism and validation by personal good behavior. But Therese was convinced that her message, taught to her by Jesus himself, was about radical grace, about following that little way, that childlike, simple path of God's love. She wrote, "Perfection seems simple to me. I see it is sufficient to recognize one's nothingness and to abandon oneself as a child into God's arms." That little way. I said at her service that Emma Jean made me think of that little way because we probably would not remember those small things that she did in any of the official documents of the church. The way that she helped Bill Handley with his robes wouldn't go down in session minutes. She wouldn't be on record as being an elder or deacon of the church. But in that moment of looking back on her life and trying to sum it up, don't those little things add up and leave an impression of small, simple, quiet, humble service? Faithfulness. Faithfulness. Today, we heard in the second part of the passage, I read, of course, about resurrection and new life, but it's the first part of the passage that really stuck out to me. We maybe should have another sermon for another day about bodily versus spiritual resurrection and what all Paul was talking about there, but his message in the first 11 verses really stuck out to me and made me think about Emma Jean and about our community and our own lives and the people who hold us tight. Paul, as we heard Jose read, Paul talks about how Christ appeared to all these people. He appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, and then to more than 500 brothers and sisters at once. Most of them are still alive to this day, although not, of course, to this day. He appeared to James and the apostles, and then to me. And he sums it up by saying, whether you heard the message from me or them, this is what we preach, and this is what you have believed. He's talking about how the message gets carried and how it gets passed on and lived out. And of course, in other places in Corinthians and in many of Paul's letters, indeed, he talks about the witness of various people that we don't get many details about. I would love to hear their stories. Chloe and Priscilla and Aquila. Who are these people? Well, they mattered, and Paul's mentioning them matters too. In the chapter following this, chapter 16, it's interesting, Paul goes through all this talk about resurrection and new life, and the first verse of chapter 16 says this: "Concerning the collection of money for God's people, you should do what I have directed the churches in Galatia to do." I just think it's funny. Again, Paul's going on and on about resurrection and the beauty of life with God and switches immediately to, now don't forget the collection, right? Our resurrection life informs how we live together. But at the end of chapter 16, he talks about Macedonia and his plans to visit, and the churches in the province of Asia, Aquila and Priscilla, the Holy Kiss, all these other people, Stephanus, Fortunatus, Acacius. He talks about the faith moving. In just these snippets, we see Paul enmeshed, as he was, of course, in this network, this community that was growing of believers throughout the Mediterranean. It's Mother's Day, too, a day we think about the gifts of women, and we can remember how Paul mentions in his letter to Timothy, his young protege, about how Timothy's grandmother Lois believed, and how she passed that on to her daughter Eunice, who passed it on to Timothy, who then passed it on to so many people. We are surrounded, as the book of Hebrews says, not written by Paul, but a wonderful image I love nonetheless. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Witnesses whose names we may know or not know. Witnesses who may be lifted up in official records or celebrated for their large, victorious contributions to our lives. But so often, the witnesses are people like Emma Jean, whose faithful commitment shines in our lives. Who are the people, the cloud of witnesses who have passed the faith to you? I said in Emma Jean's service, too, we don't often talk about saints. We don't have in the Protestant church official saints the way the Catholic Church does. But I love to think about them because they show us what it means to be Christian in many cases, a life of exemplary service. In our Protestant tradition, of course, we celebrate that we are all saints of God. There's a church in California, St. Gregory of Nyssa Episcopal Church, that has this project, and in the Friday newsletter, I'll share the link with you, but they have this huge art installation icons of a variety of saints, many of whom are sort of the traditional saints, but they also nominated a variety of people from modern times who are not official saints in the Catholic Church, people even who are not Christian. Anne Frank is listed among them. They even included 4 animals in this giant picture as a reminder that God works through all of creation. There is, too, and if anybody wants to borrow this from me, I'd love to share it, this book, Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints, which lists many modern and ancient people who may not have previously been recognized for their contributions to the faith, but who are saints nonetheless. Again, not in the official Catholic sense necessarily, but in the sense that we are all saints. If you were to draw or imagine your own huge artwork of the saints in your life, who would you draw? If you were to write a book like this, who would you put there? Paul reminds us that we are past the faith, and then we are called to pass on the faith. Now, it's easy to get discouraged about how we pass on the faith. We worry maybe about our kids, our grandkids, about the state of the world, and how our culture is changing, and how so many people maybe don't go to church anymore or don't practice the faith the way that we do. We think about and I know it's been a struggle in our own congregation, the ways that we've seen Sunday school change as a program over the years, change and ultimately maybe shrink. We worry, we don't know. We want, don't we, to pass on the faith. That's why we're here, in fact. But again, I want to call our memories back to Emma Jean and the little way of Jesus. I grew up in church, in a Presbyterian church in Memphis. I grew up in a church that had a strong Sunday school program, youth group, the works. And I can tell you that the strongest memories of things that shaped my faith are not those spaces. In fact, one strong memory I have of Sunday school is of being, 5, 6, maybe even younger, and the teacher had us all put our heads down, and the fear of God was put into us about going to hell, and we were asked to raise our hands if we did not want to go to hell and instead wanted to pray to ask Jesus into our hearts. I'm not sure that that's a positive memory. It's positive in that teacher cared for us and loved us, but the fear and the pressure of it, I think, is kind of what stands out to me more. So it's a mixed bag, really. My other strong memory of a program for children, and this maybe is something we could do, or that is fun. Someone brought a herd of sheep to our field so we could learn about what sheep were like, I guess was the point. I don't know, it was so out there that will forever be etched in my mind. Okay, but besides those things, my main memories of being brought up in the faith, as I've told you all before, are of my grandmother and how she would pick us up for Sunday school and church, how she would sit beside us and worship and hand us mints from her cavernous purse, how she would give us coins to put in the offering plate, how she quietly and simply studied the Bible every day of her life, how her life was a life of service and faithfulness. People say that greatness is goodness multiplied by time. And as we dwell here in Paul's proclamation and remembrance of the people who shared the faith being that story of new life and resurrection, as we remember Emma Jean and Saint Therese of Lisieux, who passed on the little way of Christ, I'm reminded that it's not the big things that stick out, right? But it's a series of small things of faithfulness to showing up, that we don't always know what the outcome will be, but faithfulness is what somehow gets compounded over time, like compound interest, and turns into a story that makes a difference, the way that Emma Jean did. It's Mother's Day, and Mother's Day originally began as a church holiday, a way to lift up and validate the small ways, unseen, unheralded, unappreciated often ways that women contribute to the life of the world. And other things happened to Mother's Day after that. Anna Jarvis, actually, who started Mother's Day, then protested the ways that it was being celebrated and commercialized by Hallmark in the 1920s. But anyway, Mother's Day is about the ways that we contribute to the world, the ways that our vocation matters to God. As I said some weeks ago when we had the retirement blessing, God calls all of us, and we are all called. All that we do matters. Your days, whether they seem ordinary, unseen, unappreciated, forgotten, like they're making no difference at all, it all does matter in God's kingdom. The way that Emma Jean's life did, the way that my grandmother's continued acts of faithfulness did. All of it matters. You matters. Your life matters. All that you do, all your relationships matter. We are called to live and cement ourselves in that hope. Thanks be to God.